There are three fundamentals to make it possible to draw anything, even if you have no experience drawing that thing. The first of these three fundamentals being observation. For now, we're only going to focus on what observation can teach us about form. As you observe the things around you, I want you to think about the basic form of those things. Just like we study the arrowhead to learn the planes of the face, I want you to look for the simplified planes of everything and anything around you, as if you had X-ray vision, but instead of looking for bones, we're looking for planes. Now, most tutorials like this one will only focus on drawing the basic shapes, and it is important, sketching cubes, spheres, and cylinders, bending them and twisting them, manipulating them into slightly more organic, simple shapes. But you already know you're supposed to practice this. And in order to put these simple shapes together to make a drawing with it, we'll need the third fundamental, perspective. Perspective is actually not as scary as it might seem, but we should give it some intentional practice, which I've actually never done before. So I looked up YouTube for some good tutorials on perspective, and there were none.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
So I came up with two exercises to learn perspective. And for this one, I recorded myself with my arms straight and then rotated it towards the camera. I took a screenshot of those two positions. I traced these photos to use as a base. So I drew 3 cylinders for the 3 arms in between. And then I drew the basic form of the arm on top of those cylinders. It didn't turn out that good, but I did feel like I gained a lot of experience from just this one exercise. The second exercise has to do with landscape perspective, which we'll talk about in a bit. Now,
this is where the fun begins.
I'm going to draw a lot of animals in this video because I have much more experience drawing humans, but the point of this video is not that you need to have experience with any given subject. What you do need experience with are the 2 approaches to drawing. The first one is structural, where you sketch out the 3-dimensional forms to make up your subject. The second is intuitive, where you just draw the contour of your subject without any construction lines. Let's go over structural drawings first. For me, it's the hardest, which is even more reason to practice it. All the observation talk from before, this is where it comes into play. The benefit of using 3-dimensional forms to structure your drawings will really come into play once you start rendering and color. It's possible to make a good drawing by structuring it with 2-dimensional forms, but if you don't understand the 3-dimensional forms, your paintings will look really flat. I struggled a lot with that because I used to practice drawing using 2-dimensional forms and not 3-dimensional. It can be hard to know which 3-dimensional form you should use, whether you should turn something into a cube or a cylinder. And when you start specifying and drawing a certain thing, like the human body, it can be good to study the construction that other experienced artists use. But for now, we're going to rely on our observation and the shapes we can see. So the point of this drawing method is to draw construction based on observation. And as for building on top of this construction, we'll have to learn drawing proportions and features from observation, which we'll do with the second drawing method, intuitive drawing. It's kind of funny that intuitive drawing isn't really talked about on YouTube, because aside from it being really good practice in general, intuitive drawing is the antidote to same face syndrome. So these YouTubers should really be practicing it. Instead of basing yourself on arbitrary rules, you base yourself on observation. And you can see that faces, for example, can be so different. There's so many different types of doing things. And this is why I don't have a style. Like, if you look at my Instagram, there's no consistency. At this point, I do want to find my style. And when I do, I'll make a video about it. But because I haven't stuck to one way of doing things, I've been able to learn more to get to this point. But so this actually plays into 4 mindsets that you can use to improve at drawing as much as possible. So let's go over that. So to explain this, I'm gonna use faces as an example. So on the one hand, you would draw faces that are figuratively and literally zoomed out, focusing on the bigger picture, which will force you to simplify. On the opposite hand, instead of trying to learn everything all at once, you would break down and isolate the different fundamentals that make up a face, and also drawing the facial features on their own. Then on the other axis, we have drawing different types of faces with different methods and in different styles. And the other side of that is drawing this face in the same way over and over again, which is how you hone your style. So with all these at the same time, you would reach a complete understanding of how to draw your subject. But let's now look at ways of drawing anything from imagination. This drawing is not from imagination, but that's the point. There's a specific thing that you can study that will tremendously help both your drawings from reference and your drawings from imagination, and that is bones. And no, that doesn't mean you have to know how many ribs are in a rib cage. Doesn't mean you have to know the name of every single bone. It means understanding the form of the bones that define the structure of whatever you're drawing, like how the skull defines the human face. If you want to get good at drawing human faces, learn the human skull. And when you do that, you'll realize that the bones of pretty much all living beings are all connected. This is a photo of a human skeleton next to the skeleton of a small bear. It's the exact same bones. They've just been warped. And this really comes into play when you're drawing things that aren't real, because then you wouldn't be able to reference it anyway, like a werewolf or a tauren or these kinds of creatures, whether you want to draw ones that are established or you want to make your own. So if you want to draw humans or animals or fantasy creatures, learn the bones. There's yet another technique you can use when you're drawing things that you're not familiar with. This line I just drew looks pretty meh. And to figure out how I can make it look better, we're going to do what's called iterative drawing. It's basically just asking yourself, what if? What if the eyes were a bit further down? What if the eyes were further apart? And sometimes you can get some pretty wacky results, but because you have all these iterations, you have nothing to lose by trying out everything in it. Now, this technique might seem a bit underwhelming when we're using reference, but if we're not using reference, let's say I wanted to draw a dragon. I don't think I've ever drawn a dragon before, so I have nothing to base myself on other than just what if and just trying what. At first I thought the first version I draw looked alright, but after drawing the third one, the first one looks lame. And I bet if I were to keep going, I'd draw something that makes the third version looks lame too. Let's do that second perspective exercise I talked about. So this is for landscape perspective and placing characters and objects. So what you do is you set up a vanishing point and then you draw cubes along that perspective. The last thing I want to talk about is how do you simplify overbearing detail, which is what I tried to do in this study and failed. And the answer is, well, before I can simplify a forest, I have to learn to simplify a tree. I hope this video was somewhat helpful. Now stop procrastinating on YouTube and go draw something.